Okay, welcome to Strength and Cardio Podcast, Season 3, Episode 2, Squat University. Dr. Aaron, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for having me on. I know we've been talking about doing this podcast for probably since you guys started the podcast, and finally found some time in my schedule to be able to do this. So I'm excited to be here with you guys.
We really appreciate you being here. It's a Sunday for you, Monday morning for me here in New Zealand. We've got some really cool questions, so we're going to jump right in. It's so cool to finally be able to get down and talk to you, especially with our audience. We have a lot of people that are into the strength stuff, EPs, PTs, chiros. We were just talking to Kelly last episode. It's like that amalgamation of so many professions, man. Like people are starting to kind of converge and think so similarly. So I'm sure our listeners are going to absolutely love everything you've got to say. I put it on Instagram. We've got lots of people putting in questions they want, but we're going to wait till a little bit later. I really want to open up the podcast and I want to ask you about your experience as an athlete, because I know you've got tons of experience as an athlete, and we see your videos on social media that are popping up like 10 times a day. But what about you? What about you as an athlete? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I started off playing a lot of traditional sports like most people, soccer when I was really young. Baseball was really my big love growing up. If I could play right field for the Detroit Tigers, that was like my end goal when I was growing up. I loved baseball. Unfortunately, I was not as skilled as I would have loved to be. My passion far outweighed my God-given abilities in that sport. When I got into high school, I played baseball and football were my two sports. And then in the off season was just my time to be a gym rat. And that's really where I started falling in love with the gym. I had this strength and conditioning coach who was also the one of the assistant coaches with the football team. His name was Tom Sumner, and old school powerlifting guy. He competed back when he was younger. Sort of, the classical strength and conditioning coach, football, big meathead guy. And he was almost like a second dad to me. So whenever we would be in the off season, or all summer long, basically, it would be get done with school, go to the weight room. And we were there until he would kick us out at the end of the night because he's like, guys, I got to go home. And that's really where I was introduced to a few of the Olympic lifts. I was introduced at least to cleans at that time. We sort of ran like a bigger, faster, stronger type of program at the school. And I went to a public school, so it wasn't like we had a ton of money behind the weight room. It wasn't like, at least in St. Louis, for those who are familiar with St. Louis, Missouri, there are a ton of private schools, like very expensive private schools that cost, $30,000, $40,000 a year to go to. I did not go to one of those. I went to just a regular public high school. But because of my strength and conditioning coach's background and his passion for the sport, and football was the big sport at our school, we had a good amount of money that had been raised through boosters for a great weight room. So this is back in early 2000s. We had wood platforms, maybe like 6 or 7 wood platforms, and maybe 8 Eleiko barbells. And I mean, in bumpers and everything, like most high schools in the early 2000s that are public high schools are not going to have Eleiko barbells. So, my ability to be introduced into what high quality equipment is and good lifting at that time was probably a step above most high schoolers at that time. I got to college, and again, I told you my goal was to play right field for the Detroit Tigers. I wanted to try out for my university. I went to Truman State, which is a small D2 school up in northeastern Missouri, and they had a couple walk-on spots. And during tryouts, I hurt my elbow so bad. I literally could not make the throw from the outfield to second base without hopping it. It just hurt so bad. And at the time, what do? You just load up with ibuprofen, rub globs of icy hot on your elbow just to try to get through it. And I hit really well during tryouts, but just because my elbow was so bad, ended up not making the team. And it was the biggest blessing in disguise because at the time, that's when Facebook first started. The big thing you would do is you would go on groups because you're just at your brand new college. You go on groups, try to connect with people. And I came across the Iron Dog Olympic weightlifting team. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I remember seeing a little bit of Olympic weightlifting when I was in high school. I saw, what cleans were. I never did snatches, but I saw what they were a little bit. And I went to the informational meeting and they're showing videos of Piros Dimas. They're showing, all these amazing weightlifters and talking about what the sport is. And I'm like, so you guys compete like every so often on the weekends and you just live in the weight room all the rest of the days of the week? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, sign me up. This sounds amazing. And that was in 2005. I did my first competition. Gosh, I was so skinny at the time. I was a 73 kilo lifter. So for American units, that's like 163 pounds maybe. First meet, that was 2005. And I ended up competing. I did my last meet in 2000, I think it was 2015 or 2016 was my very last meet. And the only reason I stopped was because at that time I had started Squat University in 2015. And I'm also working a full-time job as a physical therapist, 40 hours a week seeing patients. I got married. You can only have so many passions in life that take up
Yeah.
your time.
Yeah.
There's only 24 hours a day. My wife looked at me and she's like, look, you're working 40 hours a week. You're pulling two-a-days a number of times. You're working out all day on Saturday. When do I ever see you? Kind of thing. And, at the time, it's like you just have to make some choices.
Yeah.
Was I the best Olympic weightlifter in the world? No. Was it a fun hobby? Yeah, I loved it. So
Mm.
I was like, you know what? Give me one more competition, one more national meet, and then I'll hang up the boots as far as competing wise
Yep.
goes. So that was my last meet was in 2016. I think it was the American Open out in Reno, Nevada. And after that, basically, I still train as an Olympic weightlifter.
Mm.
Right now, Chad Vaughn, who's a two-time Olympian here in the United States, he's my coach.
Mm.
But I just don't compete classically on the weekends anymore like I used to. What I'll do is just normal programming, and then every so
Yeah.
often I will have my own peak and try to compete against myself and my own numbers.
How's
But
how's the strength going these days?
I'm 37. I'll be 38 this year. I will say this: pure strength numbers aren't what they were when I was in my mid to young 20s.
Yeah.
More mid to later 20s actually. But Olympic weightlifting, the reason I love this sport so much is it is such an art form. Myself and Chad, we call it ballet with a barbell. The idea is that there's so much technique and form work that you can work on no matter what. You never really truly master the sport, but you're
Yeah.
always in this pursuit of it. And that's why I think I love it so much, because I found similar carryovers to like baseball. There's a
Yeah.
common saying in baseball that if you wanted to change your swing, you would have to take that same swing, 3,000 times just to change the motor pattern within your head.
Mm.
Well, it's sort of the same thing with, the snatch and the clean and jerk. How many times you have to do the same repetition over and over to try to see a small little change? And then is it going to carry over to in 90%,
Yeah.
100% clean? Well, let's see. Where's the
Mm.
breakdown occur? My best clean and jerk ever in competition was 150 kilos, so 330 pounds at 85 kilo body weight.
Good.
Now I'm in the like upper 120s, 130 when I go on max day. So I'm
Pretty
not
good,
I'm
man.
not at my peak strength anymore. But I will say this: I feel like I am more honed in with my technique than I have ever been.
Mm.
Being now, I've been, gosh, it's almost coming up on 20 years within the sport.
Wow.
So I'm still making finesse changes to my own technique. And I feel like I'm far more efficient
Yeah.
also with my snatch and clean and jerk ratios. So another thing within Olympic weightlifting, typically you see a ratio with those who can clean and jerk a certain weight. Often their snatch is within maybe 80% of
Mm.
that. So if someone's snatching or clean and jerking 100 kilos, maybe they're doing a snatch closer to 80. Well, when I was at my top level performance and I was clean and jerking 150, my snatch was always lagging behind. I was always dealing with mobility issues going overhead. Technique wise, I just don't think I was as efficient as I could have been.
Mm.
My best snatch ever was 112 kilos. So far less. I should have been snatching in the 120s.
Yep.
Nowadays, I'm definitely within that 80 to 90% range. So I'm far more efficient
Mm.
with my snatch nowadays. And again, I think that also shows that like even though I'm done competing at that national level like I used to be,
Yep.
there's still so much more within the sport that gets me out of bed in the morning and gets me excited to go and compete against myself and try to make that lift that much more crisp, that much more clean. Because even though the absolute load on the bar isn't what it used to be, I get just as much joy
Mm.
out of hitting a good solid heavy snatch or a good solid clean and jerk and hearing that weight hit the
Nice.
ground after that. I mean, it's the best feeling in the world. So that's what I'm constantly chasing right now. I'm
Yep.
chasing perfection,
Yep.
and perfection isn't always the absolute load on the bar, but it is always trying to be 1% better in any aspect within
Mm.
the lift. And then also I challenge myself in other ways that I used to not when I was younger. For example, when I was younger, a big thing I would be chasing would be just your one rep maxes. One way that I challenge myself now, being 37 going on 38, 5-second pause squats. I'm talking front
That's
squat, back squat,
painful.
10, 5-second, 10-second pause squats. The
Oh.
other day in part of my program, It was a 10-second descent, 10-second pause front squat, two as heavy as possible type of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll tell you, like it's such a fun challenge to set yourself new goals to
Mm.
then be able to try to break those. What would have my lifts been back in the day had I done those then? I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, when you can have a really solid pause squat, I mean, your lift technique and your capacity to maintain that quality of technique with heavy load far exceeds what you think you could do if you
Mm.
are only chasing regular tempo lifts within Olympic weightlifting,
Yeah.
especially in that context. Because within Olympic weightlifting, if you think about it, the clean is your main lift.
Mm.
The front squat and the back squat are accessories for that lifter. So in that context, I need to make sure that my front squat and my back squat are performed in a way that have max carryover to me
Yeah.
performing as optimally as possible on the platform. And that's one thing that a lot of people within Olympic weightlifting and CrossFit don't do well enough is if I see you out on the platform and I see you perform your clean, and oftentimes if it's a max clean, it's going to push you into extreme positions.
Mm.
Now, where do we often see technique breakdowns? In those extreme positions. So catching out of the clean, maybe the toes spread out a little bit more than we usually want. The knee wavers in a little bit. The back rounds over because of the heavy load. Well, I want to see what that person's front squat looks like. I want to see their back squat looks like. And often they're not taking their squat accessory lifts to the extreme depths and maintaining that quality of technique in that. So
Mm.
that's a fun thing that I've been doing.
That's cool.
Right now when I do my squat programming and everything, again from Chad who's doing my programming, all of our percentages are based on our 5-second pause squat.
Wow.
So it's a different way of programming.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in that regard, I make sure that every single lift is literally ass to grass,
Yeah.
perfect technique in a way that it should carry over to my full lift. So
It sounds like you were lucky when you were in school because my gym was like a dungeon that had like a few dumbbells and like I had to get creative. But like I started training when I was 13. I was like, what do I do with these dumbbells and this one bent barbell in the corner? And then I'd ask my PE teacher and he'd be like, I don't know, look at the diagrams on the wall. So I'm looking at these like 35-year-old diagrams and that was in like 2013. No, 2003. And I'm like, what is this stuff? I remember when you started Squat University, like way back in 2015. And I remember I was like sliding into the comments once talking to you about doing front squats to build up quad strength. And you introduced Lombard's paradox to me. And I remember being like, understanding that. I'll throw it to you, Steve, because I know you've got a question.
Yeah, so how does being an athlete affect your approach to patient care? Could you give us a little insight onto that?
That's a great question. I think the biggest thing is you understand, first and foremost, what the athlete is going through from a psychological standpoint. But then also you understand what the different exercises that you're asking them to do, what they feel like. How heavy is 80% of a max deadlift? One of the things that bothers me the most with the physical therapy profession around the world, or especially in the United States with the sort of strip mall type packaging that we do. So you can walk into any physical therapy clinic and you will rarely ever see a squat rack. You will rarely ever see a barbell. You may see some light kettlebells. You'll see some light dumbbells from 1 to 10 pounds.
Some bands.
Some bands, for sure.
Always bands.
Always bands. You got to have your TheraBand.
Yeah.
But rarely will you see real strength training equipment. And again, the way that I've set up my business nowadays and the clinic that I work at, St. Louis is not the first trip for most people to make the trip out if they're having an injury. So I only see a lot of the worst case scenarios or people who have failed to find appropriate care where they live. And one of the things I'll always ask people, let's say someone comes out and the classic story is, I have back pain when I squat, or I have knee pain when I squat, or I have back pain when I deadlift. And the first question I often ask people is like, well, what have you tried to do so far? Who have you seen? What has your experience been? And I'll often ask, like, did that clinician watch you do those movements? And often they'll say, oh, no. Like they maybe asked me to do like some bodyweight squats, or hold a little kettlebell. So already that person has failed to find someone that can adequately assess even the problem that they're going through, because you can't find out what the problem is until you see that occurring. And in the same sense, having the athletic background that I've had, I can understand a lot of the ways in which people are explaining their injuries that occur within the weight room, because that's the one commonality that every athlete has, is they train in the weight room. Now, everyone may train a little bit different based on their goals. An Olympic weightlifter is going to be different than the way a swimmer uses the weight room. But, lifting is universal. And the application of the way our lifts are being performed is pretty universal. You're not going to see, conventional deadlift performed a crazy different way than for a power lifter versus, that swimmer if they're deadlifting. Obviously, there's going to be small technique changes from person to person, but universally the exercises perform the same. And that's why I think it's so important for healthcare practitioners, whether you're an athletic trainer, massage therapist, a chiro, a physio, to have a background in strength training, learn from strength training experts, but have that experience. In the same way that it's important for the strength conditioning coach to learn from the physio, learn from the movement specialist as far as the injury process and rehabilitation goes. I think it gives you that understanding of what they're going through psychologically, so you can have that conversation with them. People always talk about like, oh, Stuart McGill never talks about the psychosocial aspect of injury when you hear people make comments on the internet. He has an entire chapter in his book that's dedicated to the psychosocial aspect of injury.
Yeah.
Being able to talk to someone about what they're going through, how their injury is affecting them, what they can do, what they should not do. If you tell someone that's a power lifter or a crosser, you tell them, hey, stop squatting. They're going to look at you like, well, what else do I do? Like, I got to be able to get to the gym. There's different types of approaches to the gym, and a lot of people that I see are ones with type A, or I have to go. So you can't just tell them to stop doing it. But if you don't have the experience to know, okay, well, this person's having this pain and I can't have them do that, what else can I do? Well, if you've had that experience, hey, that person can't do this, but they probably can do this and this and this. And then that gives them something psychologically to comfort themselves, knowing that there's an end to the process that doesn't contain them just stopping what they love to do. So I think that's a huge aspect that not enough people talk about.
So say for the clinician or the therapist listening, and they don't have a background lifting barbells, they don't have calluses on their hands, they don't have like 50 barbells behind them. I'm liking the backdrop.
You like that? I didn't know where to usually I go into an office, but it's just a mess right now. So I was like, well, I'm going to bring my computer out into the gym today. So
it's epic. It's epic. But yeah, to that therapist that doesn't have that background, then they're a little lost. They don't know where to start. Where would you point them for direction if they wanted to know more about how do you coach movement? How do you coach the squat or the deadlift? Or how do you integrate that into clinical practice? Because for these people that may have, these letters after their name, they may have DC or DPT or certain things like that, but don't have a lot of experience with the actual movement science. What would you say to those people that want to do more of that stuff?
I would say first and foremost, become a student yourself. So go find a coach, go find a powerlifting coach that's taking on new clients. Go find an Olympic weightlifting coach. Go to a CrossFit gym that has good coaching so that you can get some experience under the bar. I mean, nothing beats that experience of knowing, hey, you've got 80% for a set of 5. What's that 5th rep feel like? You got to feel it. You got to have that understanding so that when you're programming for people, you understand what you're giving them, but so yeah, becoming a student yourself, find someone, go learn from them. And that may mean, hey, you got to go take a CrossFit class, or you got to go to the powerlifting coach and say, hey, I'd love to start learning. I maybe don't want to compete, but I want to learn from you. Can you teach me? Can you program for me twice a week? I want to come and do squat, bench, deadlift, twice a week. Can you program for me? Teach me, your ways.
Yeah. And while I'm here, what about 3 resources that you could say to people, not just about movement this time, but in general for the person listening? Maybe they're about to graduate, they're a new grad.
Number 1, YouTube. Free.
Yeah.
Find someone that you want to learn from and watch every single one of their videos. When I was in grad school, that's when I first came across Kelly Starrett's work. And I know you guys had him on the podcast recently. That's when Kelly was doing his mobility 365-day project, where he literally started doing a video a day.
Yeah.
And I think I caught him on like maybe 70 or something like that, but I caught him early. And at the time, you would just go onto his website. I think it was just mobilitywod.com, and it was almost like blog form, and you would just go and it would link you to YouTube. And it was so funny because at the time Kelly was shooting video on like an actual video camera. Like at the time, phones really didn't have video that you could shoot YouTube content on. But yeah, I think I've watched every single one of his videos.
They're
and
all
I
still
made
there
notes.
as well. They're all up on
Oh
YouTube.
yeah, you can go back. Yeah, you can go back. And what I did, I made notes. Like I had an Excel or Word document up, and I was like, all right, day one, he was talking about squats. What did I learn from that? Blah blah blah. Programming, and every single one. I dove in hard to like Mike Reinold, Eric Cressy, Mike Boyle. There's so many people out there that have massive amounts of YouTube content that is completely free. You don't have to spend anything. I mean, that's the glory of the internet nowadays. The reason I like YouTube so much and recommend it is because you can get long form content, so you can get context, which is tough to find sometimes on Instagram and TikTok and whatnot. Obviously, that's where I post a lot of content as well. But if you really want to get into the weeds, go on YouTube, because you'll be able to get just a little bit more education as far as the finite details of someone's teaching. But then also blog form. That's another free one that you don't have to spend anything on. Eric Cressy is like the god of blogging as far as strength and conditioning, obviously with a little bit of a twist, more so leaning towards baseball as that's his forte. But I mean, he has so many amazing blogs that reach back years and years. I know even like Westside Barbell had a lot of blogs back in the day. So there's just so many different really great avenues to learn from people without having to spend money. But then obviously that's why I'm always a big fan of reading books as well. Becoming a Supple Leopard was a huge book for me. I can't recommend Dr. McGill's books enough. So if you are a clinician in any form, I would read every single one of Dr. McGill's books. I have them by my bed at night, and I constantly am referencing back and forth to them. Those, I think, would be my top three. So YouTube's free, blogs are free, and then get some books.
And also, what's that small YouTube channel? Squat University?
It's growing. It's growing here and there.
Of course, Squat University, and you've got 2 bestseller books as well.
I do have 2 books, yes.
Yep, so people can be referred to that. And then also you've got research, like on ResearchGate. I know we have research and you've got research with other people. So if people want to go even a step further beyond just necessarily your videos or your Instagram or your YouTube, there's even some research there to look at as well. I'm just going to throw to Stephen. He's got a question about manual therapy.
Yeah, how do you approach manual therapy in your practice? Do you do any doctor-driven or clinician-driven manual therapy or patient-driven manual therapy?
Now, the way that I practice, I do minimal manual therapy personally. Back when I first started off, I graduated with my doctorate and moved out to Kansas City. I worked at a place called Boost Physical Therapy and Sport Performance. I did a little bit more manual therapy at the time, joint mobilizations. Especially a lot of post-op shoulders, doing joint mobs on, especially ones that are nice and stiff. Some backs I would do mobilizations on. I would do soft tissue work, scraping with a number of different tools. I never got Graston certified, but I would use a lot of, instrument assisted tools. Nowadays, I do very minimal. And here's the reason why, because I think it's always a good idea to explain context of that. A lot of the people that I see are flying in from out of town, driving in from out of town, and I only have a few days with them. My goal when I am trying to educate them as to the injury process and how they can take control of their injury is to teach them what they can do to fix themselves, because I have very minimal time with them. I'm not going to be able to see them with a lot of follow-ups. Obviously, I have my people that are coming from St. Louis, and I would have more follow-up time with them. But even then, I'm not seeing patients at the frequency that I would back when I was a younger physical therapist, and I'm working at a very high volume type clinic where you're seeing people 2 to 3 times a week. Now, I would say if the quickest I see people is maybe once every 2 weeks. So in that regard, I try to give people the empowerment to understand the ways in which that they can move that can change their symptoms and their pain in real time, rather than me try to do something to them. Now, do I think manual therapy, be it soft tissue mobilization, joint manipulation, joint mobilization, has value? 100%. For the person at the right time, for sure. But the way that I teach people, I try to more so, just because I have only limited time with them, try to give them the thing that's going to give them the most bang for their buck at fixing the root cause of their injury. And then if they do need something for symptom modification, I will then either show them how they can do it themselves or then request that they would go see someone. So for example, I work with Olympian Mirabai Chanu of India, and she, as most Olympians, trains all the time, multiple sessions during the week. When she would come with me, on the weekends, every once in a while, she would go and see a massage therapist on the weekend. So I'm not taking time out of our sessions to do soft tissue work on her.
Yep.
Another example, if I see someone who maybe has limited ankle mobility after, let's say, a badly sprained ankle, maybe they were put in a boot for a while. Anyone knows you get out of that boot for 12 weeks and that ankle's jammed up. You could do a manual mobilization on the ankle joint. In my case, because I'm only seeing that person one time for a while, I will show them a banded joint mobilization because I want them to be able to see how to create that progress at home, even though it may not be as efficient as the physical touch of a skilled clinician. I think it's far better than me doing it once and then them not having that access to making those physical changes over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, like that.
Same sort of thing when it goes to soft tissue work. You know, could I do soft tissue mobilization for someone who may have, you know, a trigger point or something within the rhomboids? You got some dysfunctional tissue. Sure. Or I could teach that person how to roll on a lacrosse ball and sort of work it out themselves and then do their movement exercise after.
Yep.
I think it was Kelly probably who said every single person should have the capability to perform regular maintenance on their bodies. And he was the big proponent of showing people how to do a lot of that stuff on their own. So that's probably why I tend to be so driven into that regard of showing people how to do it themselves, because I'm not going to be able to be there all the time. And in that case, you know, being able to show them how to do it's going to give them the chance to be that much more optimal in creating the long-term adaptations than if I were to just do them on them and then, hey, I'll see you in a week or two.
It's really a false dichotomy when people say exercise or manual therapy. And I'm writing a review on this at the moment. We're doing this kind of long review. That's actually the title of the paper, which is meant to be provocative in the sense that this is what I'm seeing perpetuated online is you have to choose between the two, when in reality, what you've just said, you've encapsulated it perfectly. And Kelly said something very similar. Where is that fine line, you know, between giving somebody something that's self-administered and teaching somebody to do it so that they can down-regulate their own pain or their own niggles as they go on? That's still manual therapy. Now you can prescribe that. I see people online from around the world and I prescribe manual therapy all the time. People go, how do you do manual therapy? I find out the best way where I can accurately teach and show somebody how to self-administer soft tissue or mobilization to themselves. You just hit the nail on the head. Their ankle's jacked up. You could do the mulligan. You could do this and that. You could different grades of mobilizations. That in itself is manual therapy. So it's that interesting thing, isn't it? And I know with Kelly, like back in the day, you'd see him, he'd be in his jeans and he'd be in a full squat. And he'd be doing these, teaching people how to move better and giving people the strategies to continue to do that when they, you know, go home. I think that is so key. And for those people that are listening, the cars, even the clinicians that are used to working in like a office and not a gym, maybe that's something that you can pick up on. Hey, how can I give a little bit more power back to the patient, a little bit more confidence to them, give them something they can take home? And then to the people that are do it on the opposite side of that, the people that are listening that are just all strength-based, just only coaches and stuff like that, how could they also incorporate maybe a little more hands-on stuff? Because it's both. Like I was saying, it's a false dichotomy to say choose one. I really want to land on one more important thing before we finish up. So clearly Instagram is, man, if we had to judge society based off the content of Instagram, I'd be worried. I have to say that. You do a fantastic job with what you put out, platforms.
I appreciate that.
How do you think we can make this social media community more positive? How do you think we can go about doing that?
Stop calling people out.
Yeah.
Like, that's my biggest thing. So, like, here's the deal. Like, Lane Norton is a great guy as far as like what he does and tries to do for the world. And I understand he gets frustrated when he sees people that make outrageous claims and he tries to be the, you know, the person who explains the science the right way.
The voice of reason.
The voice of reason. But the problem is you see so many people that take after that approach and they try to be the Lane Norton in their space. There's just so much calling out other people.
If you're going to put your face on the front of someone else's video and talk about it, you're going to be kind of careful how you do it. You know what I mean?
I couldn't do it because it would give me too much anxiety. You know, to be on the offense all the time and trying to go after people and prove that I'm right and prove that you're wrong all the time, it would just give me too much anxiety. We already got enough of that in the world. I mean, here's how I approach social media. And here's how I think Again, if you are a physical therapist, chiro, massage therapist, athletic trainer, any clinician listening to this podcast, the way I think more people could benefit from social media, just share stories. You know, it's like literally tell people what you do, explain why you are the person that, you know, people should go see. You know, I don't see enough. I can't tell you the last time I saw a physical therapist say, you know, John came to me with knee pain while squatting. And during my evaluation, I found he had limited hip internal rotation. So we did a test. We improved his internal rotation, and then he squatted again, and it was far less painful. And then over the next couple of weeks, we rebuilt it, and now John's squatting 200 kilos again, pain-free. Awesome work, John. Everyone saw, okay, this is a skilled clinician that can help people. I want to go see that person. You just gave yourself free advertising. And you helped someone else who maybe can't come see you. Now you helped them with their knee pain. So they are going to look to you now as the expert. And you put out good into the world and you're helping other people. That's really, if you're obviously in the healthcare field, that's why you hopefully joined that profession, is because you want to help people. Well, help people on the internet in the same way by just documenting what you do and stop trying to call out other people and being the bearer of morality within your profession, because it just makes you look like a dick when you're calling out other people and saying this person's wrong and here's why. Like, in the end, history is going to show who's right. You know, in the end, I think the people who are doing things the right way and are skilled enough, they're going to be the ones that are making a lasting impact. We're not going to remember, you know, such and such page that makes memes and call people out. You're not going to remember them in 20 years because no one's going to go to them. No one goes to someone who's got a bad attitude and is just calling other people out on the internet all day long. Doesn't make you an expert.
So you even answered two of my questions. I was going to ask you about the importance of test, retest, and I was going to talk about what Kelly says about showing your work, and you kind of covered that quite perfectly. An interesting question I just want to ask, following on from what you said, which makes absolute sense, right? These people that kind of take it upon themselves to try to police the industry. If you're going to police something, you better be damn sure you're 100% right, because what we have is these people attacking and dragging people down, and then when they're wrong, they never recant it. They never say sorry.
No.
They never take it back. And they've dragged people's careers through the mud. So here's the opposite side of that, because I know a lot of those people that act that way, that do that, they feel like it's their job to make sure that proper information is being put out there. And then the people they're dragging down end up, people go, oh, well, are they putting out misinformation? I know with someone like yourself, you are all about people moving. You are all about people exercising. You are all about empowering movement. You are all about strength training. We would agree on 98% of stuff that we, you know, between these people that are saying the opposite. It's just they find the 2% that's going to get clicks and likes. Brings me to this final question I want to talk about. When do we change our mind? Is it important to be open to changing our mind? Because it's so easy to get our backs up when people are talking at us or talking about our content. How important is it to, and to quote Stuart of his recent podcast with E3, when do we go with the science, you know, and change our mind? And how important is that to be open to that?
That's a great question. And here's where I'm going to give the answer, is understanding the thing that we've gone back and forth over DM before. And I remember reading this in Peter Attia's book, and you said you had heard about it many times, and I had, for whatever reason, I just not heard the term before, but evidence-informed versus evidence-based. Obviously, it's a common term.
For whatever reason, Stephen, in the chiro world, it's quite common.
Yeah. And maybe I had been asleep through that class in physical therapy school, you know, sitting in the back. And I just had missed that term.
Dreaming of barbells.
What I would do is I would sit in the back and I would read Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research a lot if I was bored at the class.
I like that.
But I think the big thing to understand is that the way in which we develop our methods for how we teach and our methods for how we approach rehabilitation and how we approach, maybe if you're a strength and conditioning coach, it's not built on just the research. It is built on research, it is built on your experience, and then it's built on the individual's needs. There's that tripod of things that needed to be applied in every single context. You know, I could have all the evidence saying this, I could have all my experience, but if the person responds best to this, I'm going to change my application and how they best respond. Those three tripods change over the years as you grow as a clinician. The way I approach and do things now is far different in certain aspects than the way I did things when I first graduated as a clinician. You know, you don't know what you don't know. That's one reason why I'm also very hesitant for anyone to be preaching things on social media when they have very little experience being a clinician, because again, you don't know what you don't know. I'm so glad that Instagram was not a big thing when I first got out of grad school. It was obviously it started back then, but like I didn't start creating content for Squat University until I was 5-6 years out. And even then, like, I still didn't know what I didn't know. So there's still things I do differently now than I do back then. I'm still learning things now. But I think the more experience you get and the more obviously that you blend those three areas together, you develop things that are so rock solid that, emerging evidence may come out, but it doesn't necessarily completely topple what you do. The tripod doesn't fall over.
That's a good way of putting it.
If that analogy makes sense. So here's an example. I've heard Stu many times being asked that question, have you changed anything over the last few years? Do you do anything different? And he goes, not really. He's like, because nothing has changed what he has built his evidence on and his experience on. He's got it built up so much. I think when you're a young clinician, that tripod's going to change a lot. And I'll give you an example in my own career. When I first got out of physical therapy school and I started working at that clinic, again, fast-paced clinic in physical therapy world, Kansas City, we put ice on everyone. Yeah. When they got done, let's say they came in with a shoulder injury, get them on the arm bike, warm up, go through your exercises. All right, let's put ice on for 10 minutes by the time you leave. Everyone, unless they were like, oh, I'm good, I don't need it. We put ice on everyone. Well, eventually, as I'm growing and I'm learning myself and I'm reading new books, I'm coming across Kelly's YouTube videos that are talking about the use of ice. And at first I was like, oh, that's weird. Like, we use ice with everyone. It helps them, makes it feel better. Well, I kept digging. I kept on going down the rabbit hole. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, well, based with this research and this understanding and based on my experience, let me try it for a little bit. Let me get some experience not icing. Let me not just go off the research, but let me get some experience with it as well so I can get that other end of the tripod. Okay, well, if I take someone, I tell them not ice. Well, what do? Well, I need to get them to move because movement is medicine.
Yeah.
So post-op ACL, I'm going to say, hey, don't ice. But I want you to be on this low rate TINS machine all the freaking time. I need to get that quad pumping. Now, the quad contraction on low rate TINS is going to be so minimal. It's not going to create symptoms, but it's going to create that pumping action to pull the swelling out and get the blood flow in. What's that swelling look like 3 weeks after, 4 weeks after? Oh, wow, it's actually gone down a lot. How's your quad contraction? Do you have that contraction, that VMO area? Is it kicking on well? Okay, well, maybe there's something to this than being on ice in the game ready system 24 hours a day, like most physicians say, and because if anyone listening has, done ACL rehab, like I did a crap ton back in the day, what's the biggest issue? 2 years down the road, some of these people still have huge, massive quad deficits and they can't get their quad to kick on even 12 weeks into rehab sometimes because their swelling is so much, it just completely shuts off that quad. Well, if I can start being proactive and pulling that swelling out early on, I'm going to see massive changes in that ability for the quad to contract, in my ability to starve off atrophy, but that didn't come with me just reading research. It came from me reading the research and then applying it and seeing, was there any weight to this? Yep. Any single time I'm reading new research, I'm not just going, okay, well, this is because this research article said it, then it's automatically got off, it's the truth. I have to apply it. I have to see, is there weight to it? I didn't just read Stuart McGill's work and understand how flexion, repetition over time can lead to, is the pathway that creates a disc bulge. I had experience with my patients seeing it. Yeah. I had experience myself because I've had that back injury multiple times. I've had it where my back went out putting on a pair of shoes. Not lifting 200 kilos off the ground, putting on a pair of shoes. Well, Stu writes about that all the time. Bending over to pick up a pencil. It was a momentary lack of movement control, or movement wisdom, and then it was just enough to create that final little straw that broke the camel's back, and then you create that injury. Yeah. I've felt that before. And again, having that experience lifting, because also you will have then experience with injuries likely that then you can talk, you can talk to your patients about. The reason I tell so many of my patients, hey, if you've got shoulder pain trying to sleep at night, I want you to do these 2 exercises right before you go to bed. Get a little pump in the shoulder, nothing that's going to, make you start sweating like crazy. Why do I tell them that? Because I've had that shoulder pain before. And I know if I do a few exercises before bed, I'm going to be able to sleep like a baby because that shoulder is a little bit more supported. So when we're talking about long-term changing your methods, I think back to the original question you said, Brogan, I think the longer you're in the game, I think the less and less you will see big changes. I think you will have established your tripod enough with your reading of the research, because even though I've been out for over a decade, I'm still reading research every day. And I will have had a lot of experience myself and with patients, and I will have understood the individual components to how patients respond differently. I will have built that tripod up enough to where a new research article may come up, but it's not going to rock the ship.
Also, I don't think people realize just how much research you're reading, because we're sending each other research all the time. And in regards to like the main ones, like let's just say the flexion under load thing. I know it's, very up and down in the industry, but we can go through the comments, and I could list off to you the 10 top things people say to argue against it. I could list off the paper, who writes it. I know you can too, because I see you responding to people. People will go, oh, the Franklin paper, to flex or not to flex. Oh, the Mawson paper from New Zealand. You actually have such a grasp of that. I just wanted to touch on what you said about Kelly puts it as getting the garbage out and the groceries in, right? And I think that's what this took, going back to the swelling thing. And then going back to what you were saying about the research and the three-legged stool of clinical practice. Locke often says, what does he call it? Recency bias, where people, we've got this breadth of, let's just look at research. We've got a breadth of research that we know is solid. And then we have a few outliers. And then that rocks everybody, because all these new people, Locke sends me studies from like 50 years ago that I never knew about. I'm like, I'm putting that in my review. No one talks about it. Is the research solid? Yes. But then in universities, they won't let you cite anything that's 15 years aged or out of date. So it's coming through the curriculum. And then Brookbush also talks about this quite a bit, because he loves his research, about how that works with statistics and p-values and probabilities, and how if you're going to have a overall breadth of research, you're going to have outliers that are just wrong, false positives. And like you said, when these things pop up in our industry, there are certain people that will just kind of repeat the same old outlier. When you're like, hang on, everything's saying this, and we've got a few outliers. What keeps us still solid on the ground, like you said, is that clinical experience, and under the barbell as well, not just clinical, but under the barbell.
The clinical experience is the lens that allows you to view the research and apply it the way that it actually is meant to be. Like we've talked about that research article on the stoop versus squat.
Well, there's multiple.
But it's like, it doesn't take a genius. Do them. Spend some time lifting weights off the ground. I'll tell you which one's a lot more load on the back. There's a lot of people that quote all this research and they've got no experience. They have no clinical wisdom, or the study didn't allow anyone with lifting experience over 2 years into the study because it might change the results. Well, you're doing a study on lifting.
And that's the thing. When you go into these things, it's so interesting. Hey, we'll let you go. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's a Sunday for you, so we really do appreciate it. And hey, stay in touch, as we always do.
Definitely.
And to the listeners, what's the best? I don't even need to, it goes without saying, but best way to find you, what does that look like?
Just Google Squat University. You'll find me everywhere.
Yeah, just Google Squat University. It'll pop up. All right. Thanks, Aaron. We appreciate you.
Thank you, guys.
All right.